At my daughter-in-law's victory celebration, she introduced me as the help to 200 of New York's most powerful guests. What she didn't know, for 18 years, I sat as a federal appellate judge, and I authored the very precedent she used to win her case. 4 hours later, a distinguished man in an elegant suit walked into that party. He saw me sitting at the service table. He walked straight past everyone, the senators, the partners, her father, and greeted me as a former colleague. My daughter-in-law's champagne glass shattered on the marble floor. "Thank you so much for being here with me. I truly appreciate you taking the time to listen. Before we go any further, let me know in the comments. Where are you watching from today? I read every message, and your presence here really matters." And just a quick note, this story includes some dramatized and fictional elements for educational and storytelling purposes. Any resemblance to real names or situations is purely coincidental, but the message is meant to be meaningful and helpful. 200 guests filled the rooftop venue in Manhattan, and I sat at table 18 near the kitchen beside the service coordinator. My daughter-in-law's celebration, her victory, her night. And I was seated with the help. Chief Judge Thomas Kirkland would arrive in 4 hours. I had worked beside him for 12 years at the Second Circuit Court of Appeals. Tonight he would sit at this table with me, not because he didn't know who I was, but because he did. 3 years earlier, October 2017, I had sat on a 3-judge panel hearing arguments in Whitmore versus SEC. The case involved disclosure standards in securities fraud. Natalie Grayson had argued for the defense, citing my 2008 opinion in Sullivan versus Tech Corp 17 times. She had lost, 2-1. My dissent ran 15 pages. But she had never seen my face. The Whitmore hearing took place remotely over video conference. My husband Thomas was in the final stage of heart disease. I kept my camera off during oral arguments showing only the text, Judge Sullivan, Second Circuit. Natalie saw my name. She read my opinions. She quoted my reasoning 17 times. But she never saw my face. And by the time she met me 2.5 years later, I had changed beyond recognition. When I sat on the bench, I had worn my hair in a high, elegant bun. I'd worn pearl earrings, a gift from Thomas on our 20th anniversary. I'd carried myself with the authority of 18 years in federal court. But after Thomas died in March 2018, grief stripped me down to nothing. I cut my hair short, practical, not elegant. I stopped wearing jewelry. I lost 20 pounds from months of not eating. I started wearing cheap reading glasses because my vision had blurred from crying. And when I started housekeeping in January 2020, I wore a gray uniform stained with cleaning chemicals. Natalie was the kind of person who only saw people through their titles and trappings. A federal judge looked one way in her mind, powerful, polished, surrounded by law clerks. A housekeeper looked another way, invisible, voiceless, beneath notice. In her worldview, people who cleaned toilets simply didn't exist as individuals. They were labor. They were invisible. She saw what she expected to see, a faceless worker in a gray uniform. And I let her. June 2020. I met my son's girlfriend for the first time in the bathroom of an Upper East Side apartment, one of the luxury units Natalie Grayson used as her private office. My cleaning service had been contracted by the building management. I wore a gray uniform and carried a caddy of supplies. I didn't know Trevor would be there. The work order had simply listed Grayson N, Office 12B. Natalie stepped out of a powder room, smoothing her cream silk blouse. She saw me and smiled the kind of smile people give to furniture. "Oh," she said, "are you with the cleaning crew?" "Yes," I said. "Well, the building said someone would be here. I'm Natalie." "I know," I said quietly. Then Trevor appeared in the hallway carrying takeout lunch. "Mom," his voice cracked. "What are you—" "I work here," I said evenly. Natalie's brows lifted. "This is your mother." Trevor looked at me, then at her, then back at me. I saw the shame flood his face. "Yes," he said finally. Natalie's expression softened into something worse than contempt. Pity. "Well," she said, "it's nice that she's working, staying active." I said nothing. That night, Trevor found me in my apartment in Astoria. "Mom, why didn't you tell me you were—" "Because I wanted to see who she really is," I said quietly. "I want to know the woman you're choosing to spend your life with. I want to see how she treats people when she thinks they don't matter." "This is insane," Trevor whispered. "If she knew you were a federal judge—" "She won't know." I said firmly. "Not yet. You will not tell her who I am, Trevor. You will let her show me exactly who she is." He stared at me. "You want me to lie to her? I want you to keep a promise," I said. "Your father made you promise to protect me and Hannah. This is how you keep it." Trevor's jaw tightened. "How long?" "As long as it takes." 3 months later, Trevor called me. "Mom, I can't watch this anymore. Let me give you money. I make $600,000 a year. If you give me money, I'll disappear," I said quietly. "If you tell Natalie who I am, I'll disappear. I need to know who I am when no one is watching, and I need to know who she is when I have nothing to offer her." "That's not fair," he whispered. "No," I agreed, "but it's necessary." There was a long silence. "This is the hardest thing I've ever done," he said finally. "I know," I said gently, "but this is the final test, Trevor. For Natalie, for you, and for me." Back at table 18, I watched Natalie move through the crowd. She was brilliant, ambitious, and utterly certain of her place in the world. She had argued before me and lost. She had quoted my life's work 17 times to try to win her case. And 2.5 years later, she had looked me in the eye in that bathroom, in that office, and seen nothing but a woman who cleaned houses for a living. I folded my hands and waited. Some truths don't need to be announced. They just wait for the right witness. Weddings are supposed to be joyful. Instead, this one showed me exactly how my son had learned to see me. September 2021. The ceremony took place at a historic estate in the Hudson Valley, all manicured gardens and old money elegance. 150 guests filled the white chairs on the lawn. I sat in the back row, 3 rows behind people I had never met in a section labeled simply as extended family. I had bought a new dress for the occasion. Navy blue understated the kind that would not draw attention. As I watched Trevor stand at the altar waiting for his bride, I thought about all the moments that had led us here. Thanksgiving 2020 had been our first real test. Natalie invited Trevor to bring me to her family home in Brooklyn Heights, a brownstone that probably cost more than I would earn in a lifetime. Judge Howard Blackwell answered the door himself, silver-haired and commanding, even in casual clothes. Behind him, I could see the dining room table set with china that looked like it belonged in a museum. "So you're Margaret," he said, shaking my hand with careful politeness. "Natalie tells me you work in domestic services." The pause before those last 2 words was deliberate. I watched Trevor's face. He could have corrected his future father-in-law. Instead, he looked at his shoes. "That's right," I said simply. Dinner conversation revolved around legal dynasties and federal appointments. Judge Blackwell mentioned his great-grandfather had clerked for Justice Holmes. His father had argued before the Supreme Court. He himself had served on the Second Circuit before retiring. 4 generations of legal excellence, as he put it. No one asked me a single question about myself. By spring 2021, they were engaged. Trevor called with the news, his voice bright with excitement. "She said, 'Yes, Mom, we're thinking September.' That's wonderful, sweetheart. I'm happy for you. There's going to be a lot of people. Natalie's family knows everyone. But don't worry. We'll make sure you're comfortable." Comfortable. That should have been my warning. Now, sitting in my back row seat as the ceremony began, I understood what comfortable meant. Invisible. Out of the way. Across the aisle, Judge Blackwell sat in the front row, Lillian beside him in an elegant cream suit. Behind them sat federal judges, senior partners, a congressman I recognized from the news. And there, 3 rows ahead, I spotted Chief Judge Thomas Kirkland. My breath caught. Tom had been my colleague for 18 years before I retired. We had decided dozens of cases together. He turned slightly, scanning the crowd, and his eyes found mine. I watched recognition flash across his face, confusion, then understanding. He started to rise, and I gave the smallest shake of my head. "Please, not now." Tom settled back into his seat, but I saw him glance back twice more during the ceremony. The reception was worse. Judge Blackwell gave a toast praising 4 generations of legal excellence and ended with, "and Margaret Trevor's mother, who has supported him in her own way." The applause was polite, sparse over quickly. I excused myself and found the hallway outside needing air. That was when I heard Natalie's voice from around the corner. "I'm just glad his mother knows to keep a low profile. Daddy was so worried she might overshadow our family's accomplishments. I did not wait to hear more. I walked back to my table, finished my meal in silence, and left before the dancing began. The drive back to Queens took an hour. I thought about Trevor's face when he said his vows, pure happiness, Natalie's triumphant smile, and my empty chair barely noticed by anyone. That was the moment I knew. Trevor was choosing her world, and in that world I did not exist. Over the next 3 years, Natalie's contempt would grow bolder. Trevor's silence would grow heavier. But that September night, driving alone past the city lights, I made myself a promise. I would wait. I would watch. And when the truth finally demanded to be heard, I would be ready. 3 years. 3 years of watching my son choose silence while his wife sharpened her knives. The waiting I had promised myself at Trevor's wedding turned into a slow education in humiliation. I told myself I was learning what kind of man my son would become. But the truth was simpler and harder. I was watching him disappear into Natalie's world, one compromise at a time. Thanksgiving 2022 was the first test. The Blackwell Brownstone in Brooklyn Heights gleamed with 40 guests partners, from Natalie's firm judges from her father's circuit. I arrived with a pumpkin pie I had baked that morning, dressed in my best sweater. Lillian Blackwell accepted it with a thin smile and handed it to the caterers. 2 hours later, Natalie found me in the living room. "Margaret, would you mind giving the catering staff a hand in the kitchen? They're a bit overwhelmed." It was not a request. Before I could respond, my daughter Hannah appeared at my elbow. She had driven down from the Bronx, still wearing her public defender blazer. "Mom is a guest," she said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. Trevor materialized beside his sister. "Hannah, don't make a scene." "I'm not making a scene. I'm pointing out that Mom shouldn't be treated like hired help at a family dinner." "It's fine," I said quietly. "I don't mind helping." Hannah stared at me like I had betrayed her. Maybe I had. But I went to the kitchen anyway, cleared plates, refilled water glasses, and watched my son avoid my eyes for the rest of the evening. That night, riding the subway back to Queens, I thought about the cases I used to preside over. Disputes worth millions of dollars, constitutional questions that would affect thousands of lives. And now I was clearing plates for my daughter-in-law. The April 2023 promotion party was worse. Natalie had been named senior partner at Whitmore & Associates. The celebration took place at the University Club in Manhattan, all dark wood and old money. I wore the same navy dress from Trevor's wedding. Natalie introduced me to her colleagues with careful precision. "This is Margaret Trevor's mother. She cleans houses in Manhattan." She paused after saying it, watching their faces recalculate everything they thought they knew about Trevor's background. "Oh," one of the partners said, "that's honest work." Later, I overheard Natalie in the powder room hallway. "Thank God Trevor didn't inherit his mother's limitations. She seems content scrubbing floors." I left early that night, too. The pattern was becoming familiar, but it was the January 2024 dinner that nearly broke me. Trevor and Natalie had invited me to their penthouse. Natalie was preparing for the VanceMed trial, and the dining table was covered with legal briefs. Over dinner, she talked about her strategy. The CEO was accused of securities fraud, hiding negative trial data from investors. She planned to argue that the omissions fell within acceptable bounds of materiality, citing established precedent. The materiality standards in securities disclosure require... I began. Natalie cut me off with a laugh. "Margaret, what would a housekeeper know about securities law?" "I read the news," I said carefully. "I was just thinking, reading headlines isn't the same as understanding case law. I've mastered securities law. It's what I do." Trevor said nothing. He refilled his wine glass and changed the subject. But here was the thing. Natalie did not know the precedent she planned to cite, Sullivan versus TechCorp, the one she would twist to defend her client's convenient omissions. I had written it. Every word of the majority opinion, along with the careful limitations I had built into the holding. She would learn that soon enough. I took the subway home to Queens that night, watching my reflection in the dark window. The woman looking back at me seemed tired, older than her 60 years. How much longer could I stay silent? The answer came from an unexpected place. Because I was not enduring this alone. Someone else was watching, and she would not let me quit. For 4 years I had been invisible. Ruby Washington saw me, and she wouldn't let me hide. We met in 2022 at a Park Avenue co-op, both of us assigned to the same 12-room apartment. Ruby was 52, a single mother from the Bronx with a 19-year-old son named Darius. She had been cleaning houses for 30 years. By spring 2023, we were working together twice a week. "You talk different," Ruby said one afternoon as we folded laundry in a client's marble and steel kitchen. "Different how?" I asked. "Like you read books," she said, not unkindly. "Like you got opinions about things people don't usually have opinions about." I smiled. "I do read books." "What kind?" "Legal opinions, mostly," I said carefully. "Case law, constitutional theory." Ruby stopped folding. "You a paralegal or something?" "Or something," I said. She studied me for a long moment. Then she nodded. "You gonna tell me when you're ready?" 3 months later, over coffee at a diner in Midtown, I told her. "I was a federal appellate judge," I said quietly. "Second Circuit, 18 years. Ruby set down her mug. "You serious?" "Yes." "Then why you scrubbing toilets?" I looked out the window at the traffic on 8th Avenue. My husband Thomas died in March 2018. Heart disease. I tried to keep working. I sat on panels, I wrote opinions, I did everything I was supposed to do, but I was on autopilot. Numb. I couldn't feel anything. Ruby reached across the table and took my hand. "I officially retired in January 2019. I continued. "I thought I'd teach consult right, but I couldn't. I felt erased. Like everything I'd built was tied to a title I no longer had. So I started cleaning houses a year later in January 2020. I wanted to know who I was when no one was watching." "And?" Ruby asked. "I don't know yet," I admitted. Ruby squeezed my hand. "Baby, you still a judge. You just ain't wearing the robe. How do you figure—" "Because you got the bearing," she said. "You stand like you used to decide people's fates. You listen like you weigh every word. You don't bow to nobody even when they treat you like you invisible." I looked at her and something in my chest cracked open. "My grandmother cleaned houses for 50 years, Ruby said. She raised 3 kids, sent 2 to college, and never once acted like she was less than anybody. She taught me dignity ain't about what you do. It's about how you do it, and whether you see other people's dignity too." I thought of Natalie, of Trevor, of 4 years of silent humiliation. What if I stayed silent because I was protecting someone who didn't deserve it? I asked. Ruby's eyes sharpened. "Then you wasn't protecting them. You was protecting yourself from the pain of admitting the truth." We sat in silence for a long time. When I looked at my reflection in the diner window, I saw a woman in her 60s with short gray hair and calloused hands. But for the first time in 4 years, I didn't see a housekeeper. I saw a judge who had chosen to step down. And that was different. 2 weeks later, the invitation arrived. Natalie's celebration. 200 guests. Table 18. Ruby came over that night. I showed her the seating chart. "You gonna go?" she asked. "I don't know," I said. "What would your husband want?" I closed my eyes. "He'd want me to be brave." "Then be brave," Ruby said. "Not for revenge, for truth." I looked at the invitation, then at the photo of Thomas on my bookshelf. "Okay," I whispered. Ruby smiled. "Now we got work to do." The invitation should have been an honor. Instead, it was the final insult. And I almost let her win. It arrived on a Tuesday afternoon in early May, 2 weeks before Natalie's celebration. Heavy cardstock with gold embossed lettering announcing her elevation to senior partner and her victory in the Vance Med case. $100 per plate minimum. Black tie required. The seating chart was included helpfully color-coded. Table 18 was highlighted in pale gray, labeled simply, "Extended Family and Service Staff." I stared at it for a long time that evening, sitting alone in my small kitchen in Queens. The invitation lay on the table next to a framed photograph of Thomas from our younger years. His swearing in as a federal prosecutor, 1995. He looked so proud in that photo, so certain that the world could be made better through law and justice. What would he think of me now? I pulled out a piece of paper and began to write. A resignation letter to the housekeeping agency. Short, professional, effective, immediately. I would not attend the celebration. I would not sit at table 18 like some distant relative no one quite remembers. I would not watch my son pretend I did not exist. I would simply disappear, make it easier for everyone. The letter was finished by 8 o'clock. I signed it, put it in an envelope, and sat staring at the invitation again. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I could hear Thomas asking the question he always asked when I was spiraling, "What are you protecting, Maggie?" I reached for my phone to call Trevor, to tell him I would not be coming, that I had a conflict, that he should enjoy his wife's big night without worrying about me. That was when Ruby arrived. It was 9 o'clock. She had a key to my apartment because we had been trading plant watering duties. She came in without knocking, took one look at my face, and knew. What happened? I handed her the invitation and the resignation letter. Ruby read both in silence. Then she set them down very carefully and fixed me with that look she had perfected over 52 years of not tolerating nonsense. "You're quitting." "Yes. Because of this," she tapped the seating chart, "because they put you at a table with the help, because I'm tired, Ruby. I'm tired of being invisible. I'm tired of watching my son choose her world over me. I'm tired of pretending this doesn't hurt. So you're going to run away. I'm going to choose dignity." "No." Ruby pulled out a chair and sat down across from me. "You're not protecting dignity. You're protecting Natalie. You're making it easier for her to erase you." I started to protest, but she held up one hand. My grandmother worked as a maid for 50 years. You know what she taught me? That dignity isn't about protecting yourself from disrespect. It's about refusing to disappear when someone tries to make you invisible. She picked up the old photograph of Thomas. "What would he tell you right now?" I felt tears prick my eyes. "He'd tell me to stop protecting people from the truth." "Exactly." Ruby set the photo down next to the invitation. "This isn't about revenge. It's about every worker who's ever been invisible in those fancy rooms. Every person who's been dismissed because of their job. You have a chance to teach them something, to make them see us, really see us." She pushed the resignation letter back toward me. "But only if you show up." I looked at the letter, at the invitation, at Thomas's photograph. Then I tore the resignation letter in half. Ruby smiled. I found a pen and checked the RSVP card. Yes, I will attend. I placed Thomas's photograph next to the invitation, two pieces of my life that had seemed impossibly separate, suddenly sitting side by side. "This isn't about revenge," I said quietly. "It's about truth, and truth requires courage." Ruby squeezed my hand. "Now you sound like a judge." The next morning, I called Hannah. "I'm going to the celebration, but I need you to promise me something. Don't protect me. Don't defend me. Let them show everyone exactly who they are." There was a long pause. Then Hannah said, "Okay, Mom, I promise." 1 week before the celebration, I sat in my son's penthouse on the Upper East Side. 3,000 square feet. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. Natalie's corner office brought home. I had entered through the service entrance. The planning meeting was in the dining room. Trevor, Natalie, the event coordinator, and Natalie's assistant. Hannah had been invited. I had not. But Hannah had insisted I come anyway. "Let's finalize the seating chart," the coordinator said, spreading the diagram across the marble table. Natalie pointed to table 18 near the kitchen and service entrance. "This table is for extended family who aren't in the legal field, plus our service coordinators." Hannah's fork clattered onto her plate. "Service coordinators. The people managing logistics," Natalie said smoothly. "It's a working table." "Where's my mother seated?" Hannah asked, her voice tight. Natalie glanced at Trevor. He said nothing. "Table 18, Natalie said. "My mother," Hannah said slowly, "is a federal appellate judge. She sat on the Second Circuit for 18 years, and you're seating her with the caterers." "She's retired," Natalie said. "And she works in housekeeping now. I'm not trying to embarrass anyone, Hannah. I'm being realistic about where people fit." Hannah stood up her chair, scraping loudly. "Trevor, say something." Trevor looked at his wife, then at his sister, then at the table. "Hannah," he said quietly, "don't make this a scene." Hannah stared at him. "A scene." "Mom understands," Trevor said. "She knows this is Natalie's night." Hannah left. I followed her into the hallway. She was shaking with fury. "He's choosing her," Hannah said, "after everything." "He's trapped," I said gently. "Between what?" Hannah demanded. "Between his wife and his mother. That's not a trap, Mom. That's cowardice." I touched her shoulder. At your father's funeral, Trevor made a promise. He promised to protect us. But I asked him to keep a different promise, a harder one. I asked him not to tell Natalie who I was. I wanted to see who she really was. Hannah's eyes widened. You asked him to keep quiet? Yes. Why? Because I needed to know if she could see people as human beings, I said quietly, even when they had nothing to offer her. Hannah looked back toward the dining room. And now he's stuck. He promised Dad he'd protect you. He promised you he'd keep your secret. And he promised Natalie he'd build a life with her. Yes, that's 3 promises, Mom. He can't keep all of them. I know, I said. Back inside, Trevor found me near the elevator. Mom, he said, his voice hoarse, you made me promise not to tell her. But watching Natalie treat you like this, watching you sit at table 18 while she celebrates, I feel like I'm betraying you. You're not betraying me, I said gently. You're honoring the promise your father asked you to make, and the promise I asked you to keep. But why? His voice cracked. Why do you need to put yourself through this? Because I need to know, I said quietly. When I don't have power, when I don't have a title, when I'm just Margaret who treats me with dignity, who sees me as a human being, and who only sees value in what I can offer them. Trevor looked away, tears in his eyes. This is the hardest thing I've ever done. I know, I said, but this is the final test, Trevor, for Natalie, for you, and for me. He squeezed my hand, then stepped back into the penthouse into his 3,000-square-foot prison, where he had promised his father at the funeral he would protect me, and promised me in that lobby 4 years ago he would keep my secret. He was trapped between 2 promises, one to a dead man, one to a living ghost. I didn't blame him, but I wouldn't save him either. 6 days later, on the morning of the celebration, my phone rang. Second Circuit Court of Appeals. Everything was about to change. The call started at dawn. Federal judges do not coordinate security for housekeepers. 8:30 in the morning, my phone rang. The caller ID read Second Circuit Court of Appeals Chief Judge's Chambers. Mrs. Sullivan, this is Amanda from Chief Judge Kirkland's office. I'm calling to confirm your attendance this evening for security coordination purposes. I sat down slowly at my kitchen table. Security coordination. Judicial officials at public events require advanced coordination with venue security. The chief judge asked me to pass along a message. He says he's been waiting for tonight for a very long time. After I hung up, I stared at my phone. Tom Kirkland knew I would be there, and he was planning something. 9:15, another call, this one from Washington, D.C. Judge Sullivan. This is the chambers of Justice Elizabeth Thornton. Justice Thornton will be attending the celebration this evening. Her security detail is confirming the attendance of former judicial officers. The justice wanted me to convey that she remembers your work with the greatest respect. Elizabeth Thornton, Supreme Court. We had overlapped for 3 years when she was on the Second Circuit before her elevation. They know, I said aloud to my empty apartment. They're all coming to witness this. At 11, Hannah arrived with David. He carried a small bouquet of daisies, which he presented with the kind of gentle formality that made me understand why my daughter loved him. How are you feeling, Mom? I took the flowers and found a vase. Like I'm about to walk into a courtroom. Are you scared? Hannah asked, terrified. What if Trevor hates you after tonight? I set the vase on the table and looked at my daughter. Then I'll know who he's become. I'll still love him, Hannah, but I won't enable him anymore. There's a difference between loving someone and protecting them from the consequences of their choices. David spoke quietly. What you're doing takes more courage than anything I've ever seen in a courtroom. Courage isn't not being afraid, I said. It's doing what's right despite the fear. They stayed for lunch. We did not talk about the evening ahead. Instead, we talked about David's latest case, Hannah's caseload, the small daily details of their lives. Normal things. Grounding things. After they left, I stood in front of my closet for a long time. I had bought a new dress for the occasion. Navy blue, elegant but understated with clean lines that reminded me of the robes I used to wear. I laid it out on my bed, along with simple jewelry. Pearl earrings Thomas had given me for our 20th anniversary. At 4 o'clock, I got ready. As I zipped up the dress and checked my reflection, something shifted. For the first time in 4 years, I did not see a housekeeper looking back at me. I saw a federal judge. I called a car service instead of taking the subway. A small thing, but it mattered. When the driver arrived, he held the door open. "Big event tonight, ma'am." The biggest. We pulled into Manhattan traffic. The city glittered in the late afternoon sun, all possibility and sharp edges. "You seem calm," the driver said, glancing at me in the rearview mirror. "Most people heading to fancy parties are nervous." I smiled. "Not anymore. For the first time in 4 years, I'm going exactly where I belong." He dropped me at the Blackwell Brownstone in Brooklyn Heights. The pre-dinner reception would be the final test. Family-only Natalie had said, a chance for everyone to gather before the main celebration. I stood on the sidewalk looking up at the elegant facade. Somewhere inside, Judge Howard Blackwell was hosting cocktails and small talk, completely unaware that his carefully constructed evening was about to come apart. What I did not know was that Judge Blackwell was hiding the most dangerous secret of all, and by the end of the night, everyone would know it. I arrived at Judge Howard Blackwell's Brooklyn Heights townhouse at 5 o'clock. 40 guests milled through the parlor senior partners from Natalie's firm's Second Circuit judges' family friends. I stood near the doorway holding a glass of water, dressed in a navy cardigan and gray slacks. Not the uniform, not quite the judge. Somewhere in between. And then I saw him. Judge Howard Blackwell moved through the room with the practiced ease of a man who'd spent 30 years commanding courtrooms. 72 years old, silver hair, sharp eyes. Those eyes found me across the room, and I watched the recognition flicker across his face. It lasted only a moment, a brief widening of his eyes, a slight pause in his step. Then his expression smoothed into something else, something colder. He knew exactly who I was. We had worked together for 12 years, 2005 to 2017. We'd written briefs together, debated legal philosophy, respected each other's work. And in 2016, we had both been shortlisted for the Supreme Court. I had been chosen, he had not. And now, 8 years later, he watched me standing in his parlor, the woman who had beaten him for the highest honor in American law, dressed like someone's forgotten relative, holding a glass of water near the side entrance. I saw it in his eyes, satisfaction. He knew, and he was enjoying this. Howard Blackwell wanted his daughter to humiliate me because I had taken the Supreme Court seat he'd spent his entire career dreaming of. He turned away and greeted another guest. He said nothing. He did nothing. He simply let Natalie continue her cruelty, knowing exactly who I was. Dinner was served in the formal dining room. Natalie sat at the center, radiant and confident. Trevor sat beside her silent. Hannah sat beside me, her jaw tight with barely controlled fury. Judge Blackwell stood to give a toast. "Tonight," he said, raising his glass, "we celebrate my daughter Natalie's extraordinary victory in the Vance Med case. 4 generations of this family have practiced law with excellence and integrity. Natalie has honored that legacy." He glanced at me briefly. His expression was neutral. "We are grateful," he continued, "to everyone who has supported her. Family, colleagues, friends. Every contribution, no matter how modest, has played a part." I said nothing. After dinner, I found Howard Blackwell alone in his library. He was pouring scotch, his back to me. "You knew," I said quietly. His hand paused on the decanter. He didn't turn around. "You knew who I was the moment I walked into your house tonight," I continued. "I saw it in your eyes, Howard, the recognition, and then the satisfaction." He set down the decanter slowly and turned to face me. His expression was careful, guarded. "Margaret," he said, his voice measured, "I wasn't certain. You look very different." "Liar," I said softly. His jaw tightened. "You knew," I repeated, "and you said nothing. You watched Natalie seat me at table 18. You watched her dismiss me as Trevor's mother who works in housekeeping. You stood by while your daughter treated me like I was invisible." He looked away. What was I supposed to do? Announce to my daughter that the woman cleaning houses is the judge who beat me for the Supreme Court, that would have humiliated her. "So you let her humiliate me instead," I said. His eyes flashed. "You chose this, Margaret. You walked away from the bench. You started cleaning houses. Don't stand here and act like you're the victim when you chose to throw away everything you built." I studied him for a long moment. "You're right," I said quietly. "I did choose this. I chose to step down when my husband was dying. I chose honest work over empty status. I chose to see who people really are when they think I'm powerless. I stepped closer, and you chose to let your jealousy turn you into someone who would watch his daughter mock a grieving widow for 4 years just because that widow once got the job you wanted. His face went pale. Tomorrow night, I said, 200 people will know exactly who I am. Chief Judge Kirkland will be there. Justice Thornton will be there. The mayor will be there. And they will all see that you stood by in silence while your daughter humiliated a federal judge, your former colleague, because of a grudge you've nursed for 8 years. I turned toward the door. I hope your pride was worth it, Howard. I left him standing in his library, his scotch untouched, his face the color of ash. 1 hour later, I stepped into the hired car that would take me to the rooftop venue in Manhattan. 200 witnesses, one truth, no turning back. They seated me in the back, so I watched as federal judges and mayors sought me out, and Natalie finally asked the right question. The rooftop venue was everything money could buy. Crystal chandeliers, floor-to-ceiling windows framing the Manhattan skyline, white-gloved waiters circulating with champagne. 200 guests in black tie the most powerful people in New York legal circles. I was led to table 18 tucked near the kitchen entrance. The placard read, "Extended Family." Next to it sat empty chairs for the event coordinators who would eat after service. Hannah appeared at my elbow immediately. "Mom, come sit with us. David and I have seats at table 7. "I can see everything from here," I said. "Trust me." She looked unconvinced but nodded. "Okay, but if you need anything, I'll be fine, sweetheart." From table 18, I had a perfect view of the entire room. I could see the entrance, the head table where Natalie and Trevor would sit, the clusters of judges and partners forming near the bar, and I could watch them all see me. The first sign came 20 minutes into cocktail hour. Mayor Daniel Westfield walked through the entrance, scanning the crowd. His eyes found me, and he stopped mid-stride. I watched confusion, then recognition, then something like delight cross his face. He walked straight to table 18. "Judge Sullivan, is that really you?" I stood. "Daniel, it's good to see you." "Your Honor, it's been far too long." He took my hand with genuine warmth. "I didn't know you'd be here. Are you back on the bench?" "Retired, but I keep up with the news. Congratulations on the infrastructure bill." We talked for several minutes, an easy conversation between old colleagues. I had ruled in favor of the city in a zoning dispute years ago, and he had never forgotten. Across the room, I saw Natalie watching us. Even from a distance, I could see the confusion on her face. She leaned toward Trevor, saying something I could not hear. The second sign came during the salad course. Mrs. Eleanor Abrams appeared beside my table. She was 88, a Holocaust survivor I had cared for during my housekeeping years. Sharp as ever, dressed in elegant black with pearls. "Margaret Sullivan," she said warmly. "What a delightful surprise to see you here." I stood to embrace her. "Mrs. Abrams, I didn't know you knew the Graysons." Howard Blackwell handled my estate planning years ago. When I heard about Natalie's celebration, I couldn't resist. She lowered her voice, her eyes twinkling. "I always knew, my dear. The way you carried yourself. You can't hide a judge's bearing no matter how hard you try, but tonight feels different." "It is different," I said quietly. The third sign silenced the room. Chief Judge Thomas Kirkland arrived late still in his suit from an emergency hearing. He paused at the entrance, scanning the space with the practiced eye of someone used to reading rooms. When he spotted me at table 18, his face broke into a smile. He walked straight toward me, past the head table, past Judge Blackwell and the senior partners, past everyone who was anyone in New York law, straight to the service table in the back. "Judge Sullivan," he said loud enough that nearby tables turned. "May I sit?" Without waiting for an answer, he pulled out a chair and sat at table 18. A chief judge of the Second Circuit Court of Appeals sitting at a table, meant for overflow family and event staff. The whispers started immediately. Tom leaned toward me, his voice low. 3 years since Trevor's wedding. I've been waiting for this." "I needed time," I said. "Well, time's up. When Natalie gives her toast, I won't stay silent." That was when Natalie appeared, Trevor trailing behind her. Her smile was fixed professional, but I could see the panic in her eyes. "Chief Judge Kirkland, what an honor. I'm Natalie Grayson." She extended her hand. "Ms. Grayson, congratulations on the Vance Med victory. Impressive work." Thank you. I see you've met my mother-in-law. Met. Tom looked at her with genuine surprise. Ms. Grayson, Judge Sullivan, and I worked together on the Second Circuit for 18 years. Natalie's face drained of color. Judge, dinner began. The toasts started. And Natalie's confusion turned to desperation. She needed to control this situation. She needed answers. And I was about to give them to her. She demanded answers in front of 200 people. I gave her the first one, but she had no idea how much worse it was about to get. Dinner ended. Natalie had been visibly shaken throughout her fork, pushing food around while her eyes kept drifting to Table 18, to Chief Judge Kirkland sitting beside me, to Mayor Westfield stopping by to shake my hand, to the whispers rippling through the room. The MC stood. And now, to celebrate this achievement, I'd like to invite senior partner Natalie Grayson to say a few words. Natalie rose slowly. Her champagne glass trembled. Thank you all for being here tonight. Her voice was steady at first, professional. This partnership represents years of hard work and dedication to excellence. She paused, looking directly at me, at Kirkland. The VanceMed case required deep understanding of securities law of precedent of or. Her voice trailed off. She was losing the thread. You know what's interesting? She said suddenly louder. This room is full of accomplished people, the most distinguished legal minds in New York. The tone had shifted. People sensed it. Federal judges, senior partners from the best firms. She gestured around the room, and people who support us in different ways. Whispers now. Something was wrong. My mother-in-law, Margaret. She's here tonight. She's been cleaning houses for the past 4 years. Natalie's voice grew sharper. Honest work. Nothing to be ashamed of. Shocked murmurs. Judge Blackwell half rose from his seat. And yet tonight, the chief judge of the Second Circuit is sitting with her. The mayor greeted her like an old friend. Guests keep treating her like she's someone important. Her voice was rising now. She turned to face me directly. So I'm asking you, Margaret, in front of everyone here, what is your relationship with Chief Judge Kirkland? The room held its breath. I stood slowly, not with uncertainty, but with the bearing I had earned over 18 years on the federal bench. I walked to the center of the room with deliberate, unhurried steps. The silence was absolute. Natalie, I said quietly, are you certain you want to do this here now in front of 200 witnesses? Yes. Her voice was desperate. I want to know why my housekeeper mother-in-law is being treated like a colleague by federal judges. I looked around the room, at Hannah, tears streaming down her face, at Trevor, face in his hands, at Judge Blackwell, white as paper, at Ruby, smiling broadly. You asked what I am to Chief Judge Kirkland. I let the words hang in the air. And you believe the answer is housekeeper. Natalie said nothing. What else could it be? I turned to face the entire room. When I spoke, my voice carried the weight of every opinion I had written, every argument I had heard, every decision I had rendered. Chief Judge Kirkland and I worked together at the United States Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit for 18 years. He was appointed in 2007. I was appointed in 2001. For 6 of those years, I was his senior colleague. The room erupted. Gasps, shocked whispers. Someone dropped a glass. Kirkland stood. Not could be Ms. Grayson. That's public record. Judge Margaret Sullivan is one of the finest legal minds I have ever known. Trevor's wine glass slipped from his fingers and shattered against the floor. Natalie's face had gone white, but she did not understand everything yet. She did not realize she had been citing my own precedent to win her cases. She did not know her father had been hiding this all along. The worst was still ahead. If you're still here with me, please comment any number from 1 to 9, so I know you're still watching. And if you were in my place at that moment, would you speak the truth right then? Even if it shattered everything or stay silent to protect your family, please note, the next part of this story contains dramatized and fictionalized elements for storytelling purposes. If this type of content isn't for you, you're welcome to stop watching here. She wanted to know who I was, so I told her. I stood in the center of the rooftop, 200 guests watching, and I let 18 years of silence break open. In 2008, I said, my voice steady, I authored Sullivan versus Tech Corp, a securities fraud case that established the materiality standard for corporate disclosure. Natalie's champagne glass trembled. You cited it 17 times in the VanceMed case. I continued. You built your entire argument on the framework I created. Her lips parted. No sound came out. But I argued before you, Natalie whispered. In Whitmore, in 2017, I saw your name. You saw my name on paper, I said quietly. The hearing was remote. October 2017, my husband was dying. I kept my camera off. You read my dissent. You quoted my reasoning, but you never saw my face. I stepped closer. And when you met me 2.5 years later, I looked nothing like a judge. I'd cut my hair short. Lost 20 pounds from grief. Wore cheap glasses and a gray cleaning uniform. I looked directly into her eyes. But the real reason you didn't recognize me had nothing to do with appearance. In your world, people who clean toilets don't have faces. They don't have names. They don't have histories. You saw a uniform, not a person. You saw labor, not a life. The room was silent. That is called confirmation bias, I said softly. And it's why you never recognized the woman whose life's work you built your career on. Chief Judge Kirkland stood. Judge Sullivan and I served together on the Second Circuit for 12 years. She was my senior colleague. Mayor Westfield rose. Judge Sullivan prevented an assassination attempt in 2008. FBI intelligence routed through her chambers, saved 17 lives. Mrs. Abrams stood. Sullivan versus Tech Corp is cited in every securities case I've argued for 16 years. Natalie turned in a slow circle, her face ashen. But you clean houses. I did, I said. For 4 years. After my husband died, I didn't know who I was without the robe. I wanted to see if I still mattered when no one was watching. You let me humiliate you, Natalie whispered. No, I said gently. You did that yourself. I turned to Judge Howard Blackwell. Your father and I worked together for 12 years, I said. In 2016, President Obama filled a Supreme Court vacancy, 2 candidates from the Second Circuit, your father and me. Natalie's hand flew to her mouth. I was chosen, I said quietly. Whispers rippled through the tables. You knew, Natalie whispered to her father. You knew and said nothing. Blackwell looked at the floor. The crowd parted. Justice Elizabeth Thornton stepped forward, an Associate Justice of the Supreme Court. Judge Sullivan wasn't just on the short list, Thornton said. She was the top candidate. President Obama called me personally. I told him she was the finest appellate mind of her generation. The room went silent. She declined, Thornton continued. Her husband had less than 2 years to live. She chose him. She gave up the Supreme Court to spend his final days with him. He died in March 2018. She retired 9 months later. Natalie's champagne glass slipped from her hand and shattered. You mocked the woman, Thornton said, her gaze steady, who sacrificed the highest honor in American law for love. Trevor was crying. Hannah was crying too, but hers were tears of pride. The Blackwell family slipped toward the exit. Natalie stood alone, surrounded by 200 witnesses to the truth she had refused to see. I stood across from her, not in triumph, but in exhaustion. I didn't do this for revenge, I said quietly. I did it because the truth matters, because 4 years of silence enabled cruelty, because my son deserved to see who you really are. And because you deserved the chance to see who I really am. Natalie opened her mouth, closed it, then turned and walked toward the elevator. The doors closed behind her. The worst was still ahead. In 3 weeks, the case she'd just won would unravel completely. She humiliated me for 4 years. When the truth came out, I felt no triumph, only sadness for what we had all become. The room was still buzzing with shock when Trevor stood. He walked toward me slowly, like a man approaching the edge of a cliff. 200 people watched as my son dropped to his knees in front of me. Mom. His voice broke. I'm so sorry. Tears streamed down his face. At Dad's funeral, we promised, Hannah and I. We put our hands on his casket together and we said, we will protect Mom. We will never let her stand alone. His shoulders shook. I broke that promise. I chose money over you, status over you, Natalie's approval over your dignity. He looked up at me. What kind of son does that? I I reached down and took his hands. "Stand up, Trevor." "I can't stand up." He rose unsteadily. I held his face in my hands the way I had when he was small. "You didn't break the promise. You forgot who you were, but now you're remembering." I pulled him into my arms, and that takes more courage than never forgetting at all. Trevor sobbed against my shoulder. Then Hannah was there too, wrapping her arms around both of us. The three of us stood together in the center of that glittering room, while 200 witnesses watched a family begin to heal. Someone started clapping, then another person. Within seconds, the applause filled the space. Mayor Westfield approached. "Judge Sullivan, I need to tell these people something." He raised his voice. "In 2008, this woman prevented my assassination. FBI intelligence came through her court about a credible threat. She personally ensured I receive protection. She saved my life." Mrs. Abrams stepped forward next. "My late husband argued 14 cases before Judge Sullivan. He always said she was the finest legal mind he'd ever encountered." She smiled at me. "I recognized you 3 years ago when you started cleaning my house. I never said anything because I could see you needed the quiet." A senior partner from another firm spoke up. "I've cited Sullivan versus Tech Corp hundreds of times in my career. It's the foundation of modern securities law." He looked at me with genuine respect. "It's an honor to meet you formally, Your Honor." Natalie had been standing frozen near the head table. Now she turned toward the exit. One of her own partners intercepted her. "Natalie, Monday morning, 8 a.m., my office." "Why, you failed to recognize a federal judge you'd personally argued before. A judge whose precedent you cited 17 times in your biggest case." His voice was cold. "There are serious questions about your professional competence." At 9:47, the celebration ended. It was supposed to last until 11. Ruby found me near the exit. She took my hands. "Judge Sullivan, you did good tonight." "Did I?" "You taught 200 people to see. That's what you did." Hannah and David drove me back to Queens. My daughter kept glancing at me in the rearview mirror. "Why do you look so sad, Mom? You won." "No one won tonight, sweetheart. The truth came out. That's very different from winning." "But you were vindicated." "I was acknowledged." "But your brother is heartbroken. Natalie's career is destroyed. Her family is humiliated." I stared out at the city lights. "That's not victory. That's just necessary pain." Later, alone in my apartment, I stood looking at Thomas's photograph, the same one from his swearing-in ceremony all those years ago. "I kept my promise, my love," I whispered. "I protected my dignity by finally standing up for it." But the story wasn't over. 3 weeks later, a woman I'd never met would call with evidence proving I'd been right all along. Natalie's victory was built on a lie. 3 weeks after the celebration, a stranger called me with proof that my legal legacy had been exploited to enable the fraud I'd tried to prevent. My life had settled into a new rhythm. I cleaned houses 3 days a week by choice now, not necessity. I consulted for the Second Circuit on complex securities cases, earning $250,000 a year. I guest lectured at Columbia Law School on judicial ethics. I was no longer invisible, but I was still angry. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon. "Judge Sullivan." The voice was female tentative. "My name is Dr. Rebecca Sterling. I was the chief financial officer of Vance Med until 3 months ago." I set down my coffee. "Go on." "I saw the video of the celebration," she said. "It went viral in legal circles, and I realized you're the judge who wrote Sullivan versus Tech Corp, the precedent that Natalie Grayson used to win our case." "I am," I said carefully. "Then you need to know," Rebecca said, her voice shaking. "The CEO committed securities fraud. We buried evidence. We hid disclosures that should have been public. And Natalie Grayson helped us do it." "Huh?" I closed my eyes. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I watched you stand up in front of 200 people and tell the truth," Rebecca said. "And I realized I've been a coward. I signed an NDA. I was terrified of losing my career. But if you can give up the Supreme Court for integrity, I can risk a lawsuit for honesty." 2 days later, Rebecca sat in my living room in Astoria with a box of documents, emails, internal memos, board meeting minutes. All of it showed that Vance Med's lawyers had deliberately distorted the Sullivan standard to conceal material facts from investors. They used your precedent as a shield, Rebecca said. They argued that because the disclosures were technically accurate, they met the materiality threshold. But they knew the context was misleading. I pulled out my personal files from 2008 thick manila folders I'd kept in storage for 16 years. These are my bench memos, I said, spreading the documents across the table. My internal work product from when I was writing Sullivan Versus, Tech Corp. They've never been published. They've never been cited. They're the private notes I wrote to myself and my law clerks explaining my reasoning line by line. Rebecca leaned forward, her eyes scanning the pages. I pointed to a highlighted section, a memo dated April 15, 2008. Look at this. I wrote, "The materiality standard is not a shield for misleading disclosures. Technically accurate statements can still be materially misleading if they omit context necessary for investor decision-making. We must guard against lawyers who cherry-pick language to serve their clients while burying the safeguards." Rebecca's breath caught. That's exactly what VanceMed did. Yes, I said. And look at this. I pulled out another memo, a draft of footnote 17. In my original draft, I wrote a full paragraph warning against this exact exploitation. My law clerk suggested I condense it to save space. I agreed, but I kept the full version in my files. I spread out 3 more documents, emails to my clerk's drafts with track changes, and a memo I'd sent to Chief Judge Kirkland in 2008 discussing potential loopholes. Natalie cited Sullivan versus Tech Corp 17 times in the VanceMed case, I said, but she never cited footnote 17. She cherry-picked the language that served her case and deliberately ignored the safeguards I'd built in. She wasn't applying the law. She was distorting it. "Can you prove that in court?" Rebecca asked. "I can prove it in an amicus brief," I said. "I won't tell the SEC what to do. I won't rewrite my own precedent. But I can provide evidence, unpublished bench memos, drafts, emails showing that VanceMed's defense was a deliberate misrepresentation of my work. And once the SEC sees that evidence, they'll have grounds to reopen the case." Within 2 weeks, I filed the brief under my name, Margaret Sullivan, J.D., former judge, U.S. Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit, retired. The brief was 40 pages long, but its power came from the exhibits, 16 years of unpublished documents showing my reasoning, my warnings, my fears about how the Sullivan standard could be exploited. I didn't ask the SEC to trust my opinion. I gave them proof that Natalie had cherry-picked my language while burying my safeguards. I showed them line by line, where VanceMed's lawyers had cited paragraph 3 of my opinion while deliberately ignoring footnote 17, the footnote that explicitly warned against the very tactic they'd used. I wasn't rewriting the law. I was exposing how Natalie had twisted it. Within a week, the SEC announced it was reopening the VanceMed investigation, not because a retired judge had asked them to, but because I'd provided documentary evidence of legal malpractice. Within 2 weeks, the Wall Street Journal ran the story. Retired judge clarifies her own precedent, says VanceMed defense distorted original intent. Bloomberg Law followed Sullivan standard under review when precedent is weaponized. Legal journals praised it as a rare and courageous act of judicial humility, a recognition that even the best written opinions can be exploited, and a willingness to repair the damage. Chief Judge Kirkland called me late one night. "Margaret," he said, "you just undid 16 years of bad faith lawyering. You reminded everyone that precedent isn't a weapon. It's a framework, and it requires integrity to use it correctly." "Do you think Natalie knew?" I asked quietly. Kirkland was silent for a long moment. "I think she knew enough," he said, "and I think she chose not to ask the hard questions." I thought of Trevor, of the funeral promise, of 4 years of silence. "That's the definition of complicity," I said. "Yes," Kirkland agreed. "It is. 6 months later, I would know if my son had truly changed or if his confession on that rooftop had been just another performance. 6 months after the celebration, my life looks nothing like people expected, but it looks like freedom. I still live in my 1-bedroom apartment in Astoria. I still clean houses twice a week, not because I need the money, but because the work grounds me. The consulting position with the Second Circuit pays well enough. The ethics seminars at Columbia keep my mind sharp. I found balance finally between who I was and who I've become. Ruby remains my closest friend. She still makes me laugh, still calls me out when I take myself too seriously. Trevor is the one who has changed most dramatically. He filed for divorce in September, left Goldman Sachs in October. Now he works as development director for Hannah's public defender organization, raising funds to help people who can't afford lawyers. His salary dropped from $620,000 to $85,000. He lives in a modest one-bedroom in Brooklyn, takes the subway to work, and sees me twice a week for dinner. Last week, he showed me a draft essay he'd written for the New York Times opinion section. The headline read, "I betrayed my mother for status." It was honest, unflinching. He didn't make excuses or try to explain away what he'd done. He simply told the truth about choosing Natalie's world over his own family, about breaking the promise he'd made at his father's casket. "Should I publish it?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "Truth always matters." The essay ran in mid-December. It went viral within hours. Some people praised his courage. Others said he was trying to rehabilitate his image. Trevor read every comment. "People keep calling me brave," he told me, "but you were brave, Mom. I was just finally honest." Natalie's trajectory has been different. Whitmore and Associates asked her to resign in July. The Bar Association reviewed her conduct and issued a formal censure, though they stopped short of suspension. She now works at a small firm in Midtown handling smaller cases for a fraction of her former salary, $150,000 instead of $850,000. She lives in a studio apartment in Hell's Kitchen. The Vance Med CEO was reindicted in August based on Dr. Sterling's evidence. His trial is scheduled for next spring. He asked Natalie to represent him again. She declined. I hear through Hannah that the Blackwell family has distanced themselves from her. Judge Blackwell retired quietly in October. I take no joy in Natalie's consequences. I hope she learns something from this. Intelligence without humility is wasted potential. Hannah, meanwhile, is radiant. David proposed in October on the Brooklyn Bridge at sunrise. They're planning a small wedding next spring at a community center in Prospect Heights, 50 guests. Hannah asked me to sit in the front row and give a toast. "You'll be the guest of honor, Mom," she said, "where you belong." Ruby has her own good news. Her son Darius was accepted for a clerkship at the Second Circuit after I wrote him a letter of recommendation. It's a prestigious position that will open doors for his entire career. $65,000 a year health insurance and direct mentorship from federal judges. Ruby still cleans houses 3 days a week by choice. Tonight is Hannah's engagement party, 20 people at a small restaurant in Park Slope. Ruby gives the first toast. "Real wealth isn't measured in dollars," she says, looking at me. "It's measured in character." Trevor stands next. "To my sister who never forgot who she was, and to Mom who reminded me who I should be." I raise my glass. To love that chooses wisely. Later, Trevor pulls me aside. "Mom, have you forgiven me? I forgave you the moment you knelt down in that ballroom. Now you're learning to forgive yourself." "How long will that take?" I squeeze his hand. "However long it takes, I'll be here." No more cliffhangers. But there's one more thing I need to do. One more person needs to hear from me. 6 months after the celebration, my life looks like freedom. I sit at my kitchen table on a quiet December evening, writing a letter by hand. The paper is plain, the words carefully chosen. "Dear Natalie, I'm not writing to seek an apology. I write because I've been where you are. When I was 35, serving as a district court judge, I missed crucial evidence in a case because of my own arrogance. An innocent man spent 3 years in prison because I was too confident to double-check my reasoning. That mistake taught me something essential: intelligence without humility is just cruelty with credentials. You are brilliant. Your legal mind is extraordinary, but intelligence alone won't give you the life you want. I hope you find humility. The real kind that comes from understanding that every person, every housekeeper, every teacher, every worker has a story you don't know, a dignity you can't see unless you truly look. I forgave Trevor. I forgive you too. But forgiveness doesn't erase consequences. You'll have to carry your burden. Perhaps in carrying it, you'll become the lawyer and the person you were meant to be. The door is open when you're ready. Sincerely, Margaret. I fold the letter, carefully address an envelope to her Hell's Kitchen apartment. I hold it for a long moment, looking at Thomas's photograph on the table beside me. Should I send it? I place the letter in my desk drawer. Not yet. Maybe someday when she's ready to receive it. It's New Year's Eve. I'm alone by choice, watching fireworks begin to light the Manhattan skyline through my window. A cup of tea steams beside Thomas's photograph. 5 years ago, I retired in grief. Thomas was gone. I couldn't trust my own judgment anymore. 4 years ago, I started cleaning houses. People pitied me. My son was ashamed. My daughter-in-law used me as proof of her superiority. But they didn't understand. I had spent 3 decades holding power. Somewhere along the way, I'd lost myself in the weight of it. Cleaning gave me simplicity, the satisfaction of a job completed well, the dignity of honest labor, the freedom to fail without catastrophic consequences. I stayed silent not from weakness. I stayed silent to remember who I was without the robes, without the title, without the power that had defined me for so long. I needed my son to show me who he had become, and he did. It broke his heart, but broken hearts can heal. Broken character cannot. I learned something in those 4 years. Dignity isn't given by titles. It's chosen every single day. I had more dignity scrubbing floors than Natalie had in her corner office. Not because housekeeping is nobler than law, but because I knew who I was, and she didn't. The fireworks explode across the Manhattan sky. I raise my teacup to the window. If you're hearing this story, perhaps you've been dismissed, judged by what you do instead of who you are. Or perhaps you've been so focused on achievement that you forgot to see the people around you. Listen carefully. Real power isn't in titles. It's in knowing who you are when no one is watching. Real dignity isn't given. It's chosen. The people you meet on your way up, you'll meet them again on your way down. Choose kindness. Choose humility. See them. Really see them. We're all just human. Some of us realize it sooner than others. The clock on my wall strikes midnight. Fireworks fill the sky. A new year begins. I look at Thomas's photograph one more time. "Happy New Year, my love," I whisper. I kept my promise, all of them. I protected my dignity by standing up for it. I taught my children the truth. I gave grace where it was needed. And I learned that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is choose to be exactly who you are, regardless of who's watching. Looking back at my journey through these family drama stories, I want to share what I've learned with complete honesty. Don't be like me and stay silent for 4 years, hoping others will change. God gave us voices for a reason to speak truth, not to enable cruelty through silence. I thought I was being patient, but I was actually teaching my son that dignity was negotiable. Here's what these family drama stories taught me. Your worth isn't determined by your job title or bank account. God sees your character, not your credentials. When I lost everything, my career, my husband, my identity, I discovered that dignity is something you choose, not something others grant you. My advice from these grandma stories: don't wait for a crisis to remember who you are. Don't let anyone, not your children, not your in-laws, not society, convince you that service work is beneath respect. Every honest job has honor. God doesn't rank professions. People do. These grandma stories we share aren't just about revenge or vindication. They're about the quiet strength that comes from knowing yourself. When my grandchildren ask about this time, I'll tell them, stand up before resentment turns to bitterness. Speak truth before silence becomes complicity. The greatest gift God gave me wasn't my judicial career. It was the humility I learned scrubbing floors. That's when I truly understood we're all equal in His eyes. If you're living through family drama stories of your own right now, remember this. Protecting your dignity isn't selfish. It's essential. You can't pour from an empty cup. To everyone who feels invisible in their own grandma stories, you're not. You matter. And your truth deserves to be heard. Final note. This content contains dramatized storytelling elements for educational purposes. Some details are fictionalized, but the lessons and messages are entirely valuable. If this style doesn't resonate with you, that's okay. Please seek content that better fits your needs.